The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Captain James Mitchell adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. 20 years of service had taught him that every detail mattered when representing the crown. His polished boots reflected the early light, and his red tunic bore not a single wrinkle. Around him, 8 other guards prepared for another day of their traditional ceremony, each man a picture of military precision. The horses stood ready in their stalls, magnificent creatures bred for both beauty and temperament. Wellington, a striking black stallion, pawed gently at the ground while his rider, Guard Thomas Hart, checked the gleaming tack. These animals had been trained for years to remain calm despite crowds, camera flashes, and the general chaos that tourists could bring. Their role was as important as their riders, living symbols of centuries of tradition. Captain Mitchell had received an unusual request the previous evening. Mrs. Sarah Chen, a local care coordinator, had written to ask if the daily ceremony could accommodate a group of visitors with various disabilities. Her letter explained that 15 individuals from a nearby care facility had been saving for months to visit the palace. Some were in wheelchairs, others had learning difficulties, and a few were on the autism spectrum. They had been studying royal history for weeks, learning about the guards and their horses with the excitement of children preparing for Christmas. The request was unusual because the ceremony typically followed a strict format. The guards would march in formation, take their positions and maintain their stoic poses while tourists observed from a respectful distance. Interaction was minimal and carefully controlled. Breaking protocol, even for a good cause, required careful consideration and approval from senior officers. However, something about Mrs. Chen's letter had touched the captain. She described how one young man named David had memorized every detail about the guards' uniforms and could recite the history of each ceremonial sword. A woman named Emma, who rarely spoke due to her condition, had begun asking questions about the horses, showing more interest in the outside world than she had in years. The group had been planning this visit as the highlight of their year. After consulting with his superiors and receiving unexpected encouragement to use his judgment, Captain Mitchell had decided to make this day special. He quietly informed his team about the visiting group, watching as each guard's expression softened with understanding. These were men trained to protect and serve, and today they would serve in a different but equally important way. Guard Peterson, the youngest member of their unit, raised his hand tentatively. His own younger brother had Down syndrome, and he knew firsthand how much small gestures of kindness could mean to families dealing with disabilities. "Sir, what exactly are we planning to do differently?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity rather than concern. The captain smiled, a rare break in his usually serious demeanor. "We're going to remember that our duty isn't just to tradition, Peterson. It's to the people we serve. Today we serve 15 very special people who have traveled here with dreams and excitement. We're going to make sure they leave with memories that will last a lifetime." As the morning progressed, word spread quietly among the guards about the special visitors. Each man began to think about how he could contribute to making the day memorable while still maintaining the dignity and respect that their positions demanded. They weren't abandoning their duties, they were expanding them to include compassion and connection. The special visitors arrived in a small chartered bus at precisely 10 o'clock, their faces pressed against the windows as they caught their first glimpse of the palace gates. Mrs. Chen stepped out first, her clipboard in hand and a mixture of excitement and nervousness in her eyes. She had organized countless field trips over her 15-year career, but none had felt as important as this one. David was the first to emerge, his eyes immediately scanning the courtyard for signs of the guards. At 28, he had the intellectual capacity of a 12-year-old, but his knowledge of military history rivaled that of university professors. He wore his best shirt and had spent an hour that morning making sure his hair was perfectly combed. "Mrs. Chen," he whispered urgently, "are the horses really as tall as they look in the pictures?" Behind him came Emma, a quiet woman in her 30s who usually avoided eye contact with strangers. Today, however, she clutched a small notebook filled with questions about horses that she had written with the help of her care worker. Her fascination with these majestic animals had begun 6 months ago, when she saw a documentary about the royal stables, and it had become her gateway to engaging with the world around her. The group included teenagers and adults of various ages, each with their own story and their own reason for being excited about this visit. Mark, a young man with cerebral palsy who used a wheelchair, had been learning about the architectural history of the palace. Lisa, who had autism and usually found crowds overwhelming, had been practicing coping strategies for weeks because she desperately wanted to see the ceremony. Captain Mitchell watched from his position near the stable entrance as the group gathered in the designated viewing area. He could see Mrs. Chen quietly reminding everyone about the guidelines they had discussed, staying together, speaking softly, and being respectful of the ceremony. What struck him most was the pure joy radiating from these visitors. There was no cynicism, no casual disinterest that he sometimes observed in regular tourist groups. These people had come with genuine wonder and appreciation. Guard Williams, who was responsible for Wellington that day, noticed how Emma had positioned herself near the rope barrier, her notebook clutched tightly in her hands. Every few minutes, she would glance toward the stables and then look away quickly, as if afraid she might be doing something wrong. Her care worker, a patient woman named Janet, stood beside her, occasionally whispering encouragement. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, but Captain Mitchell made a decision that would have surprised his former instructors. He approached Mrs. Chen with a proposal that went far beyond what she had requested in her letter. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "would your group be interested in a brief meet and greet with some of our horses before the formal ceremony begins?" Mrs. Chen's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. She had hoped for maybe a wave or a smile from the guards during their performance, but this offer exceeded her wildest expectations. She quickly gathered her group, explaining the unexpected opportunity while trying to contain her own excitement. David's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He began clapping his hands together, a self-soothing behavior that emerged when he was extremely happy. "Really? We can meet the horses, the actual royal horses?" His voice carried across the courtyard, causing several regular tourists to look over with curiosity. Emma, meanwhile, had gone completely still, processing the news in her own way. Meeting the horses represented the culmination of months of anticipation and learning. Janet placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Emma, this is what you've been waiting for. Are you ready to meet them?" The transformation in the group was remarkable. Nervous energy gave way to focused excitement as they prepared for an experience none of them had dared to imagine possible. Mrs. Chen felt tears prick her eyes as she realized that someone had not only listened to her request, but had chosen to go above and beyond to make their day truly special. Guard Williams led Wellington out of the stable with practiced ease, the magnificent stallion's hooves clicking rhythmically against the cobblestones. The horse seemed to sense that today was different. His ears pricked forward with interest as he observed the unusual gathering of visitors. Years of training had prepared Wellington for many situations, but there was something uniquely calming about this group's energy. Emma took a tentative step forward, her notebook forgotten in her trembling hands. She had read about horses' ability to sense human emotions, and she wondered if Wellington could feel her mixture of excitement and nervousness. Guard Williams noticed her approach and spoke in a gentle voice that contrasted sharply with his imposing military appearance. "This is Wellington," he said, his tone warm and patient. "He's been with us for 6 years, and he's one of the gentlest horses in our stable. Would you like to say hello to him?" Emma nodded wordlessly, her usual shyness battling with her overwhelming desire to connect with this beautiful animal. Captain Mitchell brought out Majesty, an elegant bay mare known for her particularly calm temperament. David immediately began reciting facts about the breeding and training of ceremonial horses, his encyclopedic knowledge flowing freely. "Did you know that royal horses are selected not just for their appearance, but for their psychological stability?" he announced to anyone who would listen. The captain found himself genuinely impressed by David's knowledge and began engaging him in conversation about the finer points of equine care. "You're absolutely right about the selection process," he confirmed. What else do you know about their training?" David beamed with pride at having his knowledge acknowledged by someone he clearly viewed as an expert. Meanwhile, Mark had positioned his wheelchair closer to get a better view. His cerebral palsy made speaking difficult, but his eyes were bright with fascination as he watched the interaction between the horses and their handlers. Guard Peterson noticed Mark's intense interest and wheeled over another horse, a gentle, gray gelding named Sterling. "Mark loves animals," his care worker explained quietly to Guard Peterson. "He volunteers at a local animal shelter when he's able. He's always been drawn to horses but never had the chance to meet one up close." Peterson knelt down beside Mark's wheelchair, bringing himself to eye level. "Sterling here is actually quite the character," he said conversationally. "He has a habit of trying to untie his own lead rope when he's bored. Smart fellow, but sometimes too smart for his own good." Mark's face lit up with delight at this insider information. Lisa, the young woman with autism, had initially hung back from the group, overwhelmed by the new sights and sounds. But as she watched the calm interactions between her fellow visitors and the horses, she began to relax. The horses' steady presence seemed to create a bubble of tranquility that made the usually challenging social situation more manageable for her. Guard Thompson approached her slowly, reading her body language carefully. His sister worked with children on the autism spectrum, and he had learned to recognize the signs of sensory overload. "The horses are very good at staying calm," he said simply, without pressuring her to come closer. "They're trained to be peaceful, even when there's a lot going on around them." Emma finally worked up the courage to reach out and touch Wellington's neck. The moment her hand made contact with his warm coat, her face transformed with wonder. She had spent months reading about horses, studying their anatomy and behavior, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of their presence. Wellington stood perfectly still, as if he understood the significance of this moment. "He's so warm," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. It was the first time Mrs. Chen had heard her speak unprompted to a stranger in years. Guard Williams smiled and began explaining how horses use their body heat to communicate comfort to humans, information that Emma absorbed eagerly while maintaining her gentle contact with Wellington. The other guards had taken notice of what was happening and, without any formal instruction, had begun bringing out additional horses. Soon, the courtyard was filled with the quiet sounds of meaningful connections being formed between these special visitors and the magnificent animals that served alongside the guards. Word of the special meet and greet had quietly spread among the palace staff, and several off-duty guards had appeared to help with the unprecedented event. What had begun as a simple accommodation had evolved into something much more significant. The usual rigid structure of the morning routine had given way to something organic and beautiful. Sarah, a young woman with Down syndrome who had been particularly quiet during the bus ride, suddenly came alive when she met a gentle chestnut mare named Grace. The horse seemed to respond to Sarah's pure, uncomplicated joy, lowering her head so Sarah could reach her more easily. Sarah began humming softly, a behavior that typically indicated she was feeling completely comfortable and happy. "She's singing to the horse," Sarah's mother explained to Guard Martinez, who was holding Grace's lead rope. "Sarah only hums when she feels completely safe and content. This is extraordinary for her." Martinez found himself deeply moved by this simple interaction. In his 8 years of service, he had never witnessed anything quite like the immediate and profound connection between Sarah and Grace. David had moved on from reciting facts to asking increasingly sophisticated questions about the guards' daily routines. Captain Mitchell realized that this young man's knowledge was not just memorized information. He truly understood and appreciated the complexities of their work. "David," the captain said thoughtfully, "would you be interested in seeing some of our ceremonial equipment up close?" The invitation to see the guards' ceremonial gear was unprecedented. These were not museum pieces but active equipment used in official duties. However, Captain Mitchell trusted David's respectful nature and genuine interest. As they walked toward the equipment room, David's excitement was palpable but controlled. He understood that he was being given a special privilege. Emma had not. Moved from Wellington's side, continuing her gentle interaction with the stallion. Her care worker Janet watched in amazement as Emma began whispering to the horse, sharing thoughts and observations that she rarely vocalized even with people she knew well. Guard Williams stood nearby, not intervening, but ready to help if needed, recognizing that he was witnessing a breakthrough moment. "I read that horses can live up to 30 years, Emma said quietly to Wellington as if they were having a private conversation. "You're still young, aren't you? You have many more years to serve and be magnificent." Her words were simple but carried a depth of understanding about the horse's role and importance. Mark had been given permission to come closer to Sterling, and his care worker helped position his wheelchair so he could reach out and touch the horse's neck. Despite his physical limitations, Mark's touch was gentle and sure. Sterling responded by taking a small step closer, clearly comfortable with this new friend. The interaction was wordless but profound, two beings connecting across the barriers of species and disability. Lisa had gradually worked up the courage to approach one of the younger horses, a 4-year-old named Valor, who was known for his particularly gentle nature with nervous visitors. Guard Thompson had chosen him specifically for Lisa, recognizing that she needed a horse that would not be overwhelmed by her cautious energy. As Lisa tentatively reached out her hand, Valor stood perfectly still, allowing her to set the pace of their interaction. The regular tourists who had gathered to watch the ceremony were witnessing something extraordinary, without fully understanding what was happening. Some snapped photos of the heartwarming scenes, while others simply watched in quiet appreciation. The atmosphere was unlike anything typically seen during the formal ceremonies. There was a warmth and humanity that transcended the usual pageantry. Mrs. Chen moved through the group, checking on each visitor while trying to contain her own emotional response to what was unfolding. This was beyond anything she had hoped for when she wrote her simple request letter. The guards were not just tolerating their presence, they were actively engaging, sharing their knowledge, and creating individual moments of connection with each visitor. One of the palace supervisors had arrived to observe the unusual scene. Instead of expressing concern about the departure from protocol, he watched with approval as his guards demonstrated a different kind of service, one that honored the spirit of their duty while adapting to meet the needs of special visitors. This was leadership in action, showing that true strength sometimes comes from flexibility and compassion. The time had come for the formal ceremony to begin, but the guards faced an unusual challenge. How could they transition back to their traditional roles while preserving the magical connections that had been formed? Captain Mitchell made another, unprecedented decision. He would modify the ceremony itself to include their special guests as honored observers rather than distant spectators. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the authority of his rank but softened with warmth. "Today we have the privilege of performing our ceremony for some very special visitors who have shown exceptional appreciation for our traditions and our horses. We would like to invite them to observe from a place of honor." Mrs. Chen watched in amazement as the guards arranged a special viewing area closer to where the ceremony would take place. The regular tourists seemed genuinely pleased by this gesture, many of them smiling and nodding approvingly at the special treatment being given to the group. There was no resentment, only a shared appreciation for the kindness being shown. David was practically vibrating with excitement as he was given a front-row position to observe the ceremony. His extensive knowledge had prepared him to appreciate every detail of what he was about to witness. "Mrs. Chen," he whispered urgently, "this is even better than I imagined in all my reading. Look at how perfectly their uniforms are maintained." Emma remained close to Wellington, who would be part of the ceremony. Guard Williams had quietly arranged for her to stay nearby so she could watch her new friend perform his duties. "Emma," he said gently, "Wellington is going to show you how well trained he is. He'll stand perfectly still for the entire ceremony, just like he's been taught." The ceremony began with the traditional precision that had been maintained for generations. The guards moved in perfect synchronization, their movements crisp and purposeful, but there was something different in their bearing today. A subtle warmth that came from knowing they were performing for people who truly appreciated their dedication and skill. Mark watched intently from his wheelchair, his eyes following every movement. His care worker noticed that he was trying to sit up straighter, inspired by the perfect posture of the guards. The ceremony represented everything that Mark admired about dedication and excellence, despite physical challenges, themes that resonated deeply with his own daily struggles and triumphs. As the ceremony progressed, something remarkable began to happen. The special visitors' obvious joy and appreciation began to affect not just the guards and horses, but the entire crowd. Regular tourists found themselves paying closer attention, inspired by the enthusiasm of their fellow observers. Children in the crowd began asking their parents more thoughtful questions about what they were seeing. Lisa, who had initially worried about being overwhelmed by the crowd and noise, discovered that focusing on the ceremony and the horses gave her a sense of calm purpose. The structured nature of the performance, combined with her newfound connection to the animals, helped her manage the sensory input in a way she had never experienced before. Sarah continued to hum softly throughout the ceremony, her melody creating a gentle soundtrack that seemed to enhance rather than disrupt the formal proceedings. Several people near her began to smile as they noticed her musical response to what she was witnessing. Her pure expression of joy was contagious. Guard Peterson, while maintaining his ceremonial stance, found his thoughts drifting to his brother, and how proud his family would be to know that he had been part of something so meaningful. The rigid training that had taught him to suppress personal emotions during duty was challenged by the profound satisfaction he felt in serving these special visitors. The horses seemed to sense the unique energy of the day as well. Wellington stood with particular grace, as if he understood that Emma was watching his every move. Sterling held his position with exceptional stillness, perhaps responding to Mark's intense focus and admiration. Even the youngest horses performed with remarkable composure, influenced by the respectful attention they were receiving. As the ceremony reached its climax, Captain Mitchell realized that this day would be remembered not just by their special visitors, but by everyone present. They had discovered that tradition and compassion were not opposing forces. When combined thoughtfully, they could create something even more powerful than either could achieve alone. The formal elements of the ceremony continued flawlessly, but they were now infused with a deeper meaning. This was not just a display of historical pageantry, but a living demonstration of service, honor, and human connection. The guards were not just performing their duties, they were sharing their purpose with people who could truly appreciate its significance. As the ceremony concluded and the guards began to move their horses back toward the stables, the special visitors remained in their honored positions, clearly reluctant for the experience to end. The magic of the morning hung in the air like a gentle mist, touching everyone present with its warmth and significance. Captain Mitchell approached Mrs. Chen with a small envelope in his hand. "Ma'am," he said formally but with a smile in his eyes, "on behalf of the entire unit, I wanted to present your group with these certificates recognizing them as honorary friends of the Royal Guard. It's not an official title, but it comes with our sincere respect and gratitude for the joy you've brought to our day." Mrs. Chen opened the envelope with trembling hands to find beautifully handwritten certificates for each member of their group. The guards had somehow found time during the ceremony preparation to create these personal mementos, each one acknowledging the specific interests and contributions of individual visitors. David's certificate mentioned his exceptional knowledge of military history and traditions. Emma's recognized her special connection with the horses and dedication to learning. David was the first to receive his certificate, and his reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Tears of pure joy streamed down his face as he clutched the paper to his chest. "This is the best day of my entire life," he declared with the honest emotion that only comes from a heart unburdened by social pretense. "I'm really, truly an honorary friend of the Royal Guard." Emma's certificate presentation was witnessed by Wellington, who had been brought over specifically so she could share this moment with her new equine friend. As she read the words recognizing her connection with the horses, she reached out once more to touch Wellington's neck. "Thank you," she whispered, and it was unclear whether she was speaking to the horse, to Guard Williams, or to the entire experience. Mark's care worker read his certificate aloud to him, her voice thick with emotion as she described how it recognized his inspiring courage and appreciation for excellence in service. Mark's response was a radiant smile that spoke volumes about the impact this recognition had on his sense of worth and belonging. The other visitors each had their moment of recognition, each certificate crafted to acknowledge something specific and meaningful about their individual participation in the day. Lisa's mentioned her thoughtful observation and respectful engagement. Sarah's celebrated her joyful spirit and musical appreciation. Each person was seen, acknowledged, and valued for who they were. As the group prepared to leave, something unprecedented happened. Several of the guards stepped forward to shake hands and offer personal farewells to their new friends. Guard Williams gave Emma a small photo of Wellington that he had taken from his personal collection. Guard Peterson presented Mark with a detailed explanation of Sterling's daily care routine, knowing it would be treasured by someone who appreciated the dedication required to maintain these magnificent animals. The regular tourists who had witnessed the morning's events began approaching the special visitors with their own expressions of appreciation. Many commented on how much more meaningful the ceremony had become when viewed through the eyes of people who truly understood its significance. Children asked to see the certificates and listened intently as the visitors explained what they had learned. Mrs. Chen found herself surrounded by parents asking for information about the care facility and expressing admiration for the program that had made this visit possible. Several offered to make donations or volunteer their time, inspired by what they had witnessed. The ripple effects of kindness were already spreading far beyond the palace walls. As the chartered bus prepared to leave, Captain Mitchell stood at attention with his fellow guards, offering a formal salute to their departing friends. It was a gesture of respect, typically reserved for visiting dignitaries, but these visitors had earned something even more valuable: genuine affection and admiration from people who rarely allowed themselves to be moved by their interactions with the public. The bus pulled away slowly, its passengers pressing their faces to the windows for one last look at the palace, the guards, and the horses that had made their dreams come true. Each person carried with them not just certificates and photographs, but memories that would sustain them through difficult days and remind them that they were valued and appreciated by the world beyond their daily challenges. Back at the palace, the guards resumed their regular duties, but with a renewed understanding of why their work mattered. They had been reminded that their role extended beyond ceremony and tradition. They were guardians of something precious and meaningful that could touch hearts and change lives. The special visitors had given them a gift equal to what they had received: the knowledge that their service had the power to create profound joy and lasting memories for people who needed both.